thank you everyone for being here today. I know there's a lot of really exciting talks you can be at, so I super appreciate you being here in the open government track. It's an important thing to me. Clearly, it's an important thing to you. So I'm looking forward to sharing some stories and answering your questions as we get a little further along. But I'm going to do something a little different today. I hope that you'll, roll with it. This is going to be my visual aid. I'm going to loop it in the background and I'll explain it in a little while. So to get started, my name is Remy DeCausemaker. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the open source lead at the digital service at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And before I get started, of course, being a government employee comes with having a lot of disclaimers. So the first one is, the views presented here today are those of the speaker and do not necessarily represent the views of CMS, its components, or any other components of the United States federal government. And the second one, which is a classic, is I'm not a lawyer or an accountant, and this does not constitute legal or financial advice. So with all the disclaimers sort of out of the way, let's talk a little bit about what is the digital service. So the digital service is a group of folks who work to transform the U.S. healthcare system by improving the design of healthcare experiences, delivering value to government, providers, patients, modernizing systems, and participating in policy development. And we accomplish this by deploying small responsive groups of designers, engineers, product managers, and others within CMS on a tour of duty, where those folks work alongside dedicated civil servants. And these multidisciplinary teams incorporate best practices and new approaches to support government modernization and solve some of the most complex problems facing the healthcare system today. And the video that you're watching in the background here is built by this tool called Gorse. It's like source, but with a G. And Gorse, this Gorse visualization is of the CMS Open API source code repositories that were created by developers at CMS and are maintained by our Office of Enterprise Data and Analytics, or OEDA as we call them. And the software projects themselves, they are displayed as animated trees where the directories appear as branches, the files appear as these leaves of bubbles, and developers are seen working on the trees at the time that they were committing. So in the top, it's a little faded in here. If we could turn down the lights, that might be helpful so folks can see a little better. But at the top of the screen, you can see the date of when the developers were doing the work. And the red lasers are deletes, the green lasers are additions, and the orange lasers are edits. And this is generated from the Git logs from each of the repositories themselves. So we're sort of doing some time traveling and playing back the history of source code repositories, going back to about 2016 up until March of this year. And I've color-coded each repo so that they are each separate projects, so are sort of a little easier to keep track of. And another feature is that on the left, you can see that sort of ranked list, and it is all of the various file types that are appearing across all of these repositories. So as it ticks up, the project is color-coded. So there's 700 something Java files and 1,000 Go files, and whichever ones have the most gets to the top of the list, and it sort of moves down and dynamically as the visualization gets played back. I'm going to play this on a loop, so don't worry, you're not going to miss it. It's going to start over again. And I'm going to just leave this up in the background. And also, I will get into some of the technical details of it because we are at a technical conference. So if you'll permit me to maybe dive into the configs a little bit and talk about the render pipeline, that's a little bit later though. So the basic process, to sort of go over an overview of it, is the first thing we did was install some dependencies, and they are, standalone open source packages. I will go into some of those as we read in the repo in a bit. And then you create a repos directory. For this particular visualization, I'm only visualizing about 5 repositories. Then you clone the repos into that directory. You generate logs from the Git history. You then use some fancy regular expressions to insert some parent names into directories and then colorize them. And then you can concatenate and sort all of the logs together into one sort of gigantic compiled log. And then you run the Gorse tool on it, and it generates this cool video. And you can do things like add captions and change all these different bells and whistles to make it zoom in or zoom out, or go slow or go fast. But at the end, using FFmpeg, you can then export it to a video. And this video is live on the CMS YouTube channel. It's definitely something that I'm pretty happy about, seeing like weird hacker data visualization stuff showing up on a government website under a Creative Commons license. Definitely a cool thing to release here at scale. So that's exciting. Happy to work with our social media team to make that happen. So that's the process, and we'll dig into the config and the rendering pipelines in a little bit. But let's talk about some of the projects that are up here on the screen. So all of the repos that you see right now, you can go to developer.cms.gov. And this is the place where we have the collection of all of our APIs, our data sets, frameworks, style guides, and everything used to develop applications that help people get the services and benefits that rely on the data underneath them. And they can all be found on that website, and then those where those have repos, they link to GitHub. And our GitHub is CMS.gov, where you can find a lot of these public repositories as well. You can actually find the repo for this visualization at the bottom of the screen. Maybe folks in the back can't read it. github.com/dcause-gov/cms-gorse. I'll be going into that in a little while. And that as well is released CC0. So open source, public domain, take and run as you will. So the 5 repos that we're looking at right now, so on your screen we just started over, so this is a good one. So the top one is the Blue Button project, and then the bottom one is the Beneficiary Fire Data Server, or BFD server. And BFD server is an internal backend to the Medicare beneficiaries' demographics and enrollment and claims data, and it's made available in a FHIR format, FHIR. And FHIR stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource. And V1 development began back in 2012, and the current version is up to V4 now. And it is an open standard that defines how healthcare information can be exchanged between different computer systems, regardless of how it is stored in those systems. So it allows healthcare information, including clinical and administrative data, to be available securely to those who need to access it and to those that have a right to get access to it. So the standards development organization that oversees that is Health Level 7, or hl7.org, and they take a collaborative approach to developing and upgrading FHIR. So there's public comment period, it's done sort of RFC style, people can chime in, they can make proposals. It is run very similar to an open source community. I'm still learning all about all of the open standards work that happens in the healthcare field. So FHIR is a RESTful resource, meaning that the server will respond with a representation of the resource, most often in like HTML or XML or JSON, and then that resource contains hypermedia links that can be followed to make the state of the system change. So, TLDR, it allows clinical and administrative data about healthcare records to be encoded into structures and then wrapped in a RESTful API. And BFD, which is down in that bottom left corner, powers the claims data going into a lot of these other repositories that are about to start popping up on the screen. So Blue Button's at the top, and then boom, we just saw the BCDA repo hit the deck here. And BCDA stands for Beneficiary Claims Data API. And this enables accountable care organizations, or ACOs, to retrieve Medicare Part A, B, and D claims data for beneficiaries. And then we use this, they use that data to then provide quality metrics and participate in other regulatory regimes that CMS has out there, along with other parts of Health and Human Services. And then You just saw a new repo, the yellow one in the middle. That's DPC, and that's data at the point of care. And that's an API that enables making a patient's Medicare claims data available to healthcare providers for treatment services. So that's like doctor to doctor API, where if we want healthcare providers to get access to data. And then AB2D, which that was a huge commit to beneficiary fire. But AB2D is, I don't know if it's on the screen yet, but once it shows up, it provides prescription drug sponsors with secure Medicare Parts A and B claims for enrollees. So it's like specifically provides A and B Medicare claims to drug prescription folks. And then at the beginning, we saw the Blue Button API was sort of the first repository that was being visualized. And Blue Button delivers Medicare Part A, B, and D data for over 60 million people with Medicare in the United States. And it is probably our most widely used and longest lived of our open API projects. So to go through a little brief timeline about Blue Button. It was started in May of 2015 during the first tenure of, I believe we had our first CTO and our first CIO of the federal government back in those days. It was Anish Chopra and Todd Park. And Todd Park ended up being the CTO of the Department of Health and Human Services, one of the first ones. And they had this idea of unlocking the power of data to make interoperable app development possible. And that vision started back then and is still under development today. In 2018, we saw the public launch of the Blue Button API, and back then, I believe it was PDFs. So you could request, but it would come back in sort of human-readable, but not easily machine-readable formats. So over the course of the years, as we came along into the future, into 2018 and 2020, Blue Button 2.0 was built so that we could have machine-readable formats where people could get their own data about their Medicare claims and approve third-party folks to get access to that data. And places like, Apple's App Store and other parts of the ecosystem have adopted the standard and use it to deliver health apps. So, this is definitely something that we can point to and show that open source and open standards are making a big difference. So how do we enable data exchange? Collaborating with industry, implementing programs, developing policies. There's always a human-centered design approach that is at the core of what the digital service does. We work with user experience designers, and you can look at like playbook.cio.gov to get an idea of what that human-centered designed process looks like, where we're talking with users and trying to bring more of a product-y, agile-y approach to a place where, in the government, where maybe that hasn't been the standard way to deliver software and do work in the past. So since 2018, there's a group called CARIN, C-A-R-I-N, which is a multi-sector group of stakeholders from hospitals, physicians, clinicians, and millions of patients and other consumers and caregivers. So they worked alongside CMS developers to provide the Blue Button 2 API, and getting those A, B, and D claims and enrollment data for each person, one at a time, and providing authorization for it was 2018. And then in 2020, CMS published the Interoperability and Patient Access Final Rule, which is Regulation CMS-9115-F, if you want to look it up on regulations.gov, which puts patients first by establishing policies that break down barriers in the nation's healthcare system and enable better patient access to their information, improving operability, and unleashing innovation while reducing payers' burdens and burdens on providers. So to give sort of a summary, the final rule established policies and implementing data exchange. So that's like what these APIs are all about and sort of what they enable. More or less, you've got the beneficiary FHIR data server that enables 3 different lenses into the same data set to be used in sort of 3 different situations. One is for providers who want to share data with each other. One is for prescription drug providers who want to get access to A and B claims. And the other is more of an open sort of individual who wants to grant third-party access to their claims data. And then that can be used in lots of different ways. So that's the ecosystem of APIs that we're looking at. When I started looking into doing this presentation, I thought I was going to just visualize all of the stuff on CMS.gov, and this is already complicated enough to look at, and there's only 5 projects. We have over 220 repos on our entire GitHub, and at that point, like, it's already zoomed out to the point where you can't really read the names, but in that one, it just looks like just a colony of ants almost. And so I had limited it to this, but using the tools that are published on the GitHub, we can actually edit and make it work for whatever needs you have. So I'm going to do the thing where I stop the video and dive into the repo. So my resolution is not great. Let's see if I can. That's a little better. So github.com, DeCausemaker, CMS-GORS. So we got the link to the YouTube video here, so you can just, if you can remember the GitHub repo, you can find it. The video as well. And like I said, the way you use it is by installing the deps, creating a directory, cloning repos, generating logs, inserting names, colorizing the logs, concatenating everything, running GORS, and exporting the video. So I used Brew to install GORS and FFmpeg, but they are standard tools that are definitely available in, Linux distributions and package managers. I've run the GORS pipeline on Fedora. I've run it in other places too. It is an excellent tool. Highly recommend it. And then the tools that I used for some of the command line and text editing magic were Vim and sed, but any text manipulation tools capable of regexes and find and replace functions will probably do the trick for you. Open source has lots of tools that do these kinds of things, and IDEs these days even have that kind of capability. So you start off by making a directory called repos. You go into it. This could have been one bash script, but I did it the hard way so everyone could see what each of the steps are. You clone each of the individual repositories. These are the addresses for the ones that we saw on the screen, but you can substitute in whatever repos you would like. And then you use the GORS command to output a custom log, and you tell it what log you want it to be, and then you tell it what repo you want to be associated with the log. And you do that for all the various ones that are in there. And then you run this slick little sed command that will then insert the name of the project, which is, this part of the regex that I highlighted here, into the log. And that's what makes it so that they all don't live in the same tree. And it separates them out by tree so that you can view multiple repositories on one tree, because it's meant to sort of be a single repository visualization course. So after you've added all of the names, and the order is important, I found out, you want to make sure you add the names before you try and colorize it, or else it'll do weird stuff. I used Vim, and all I did was add a hex code to the very end of each line in the log. So you can just use like a standard color, any color you want that's available in hex. I looked at our CMS branding guidelines and tried to use our official colors from branding so that it would look nice on our background. I think it worked out pretty well, and I love Vim for being able to do this kind of stuff. You can of course use whatever text editor you like. And then you concatenate all of the logs. So in this case, there were the 5 repos, and then pipe that through sort, and then push that out to a giant log. And that is the log that you use to generate the GORS visualization. And the pipeline that I use for that is pretty simple. I like to time it so that I know how long it takes, because rendering is a thing that you can go and do other stuff while you're waiting for things to complete. You load in a custom config. So we'll dive into CMS.config in just a second. -F means full screen. Then you pass in the resolution. For this, 1080 was the resolution that the conference recommended for videos and presentations. And then you pass it to log. It worked great. It took about 6 minutes to render and display on the screen. And then at the end of it, I got 2 gnarly FFmpeg pipelines. And these took a little bit of playing around with, but you basically pipe the exact same command for rendering Gorse, but then you do a -O and you pipe the standard in and you pass it to FFmpeg. And then you have a bunch of different options. These are all available in the Gorse.io source code repository. It'll show you like various ways you can render out. I have one example for WebM, and then I also have an H.264 pipeline as well for doing MP4. So really, those are all the steps and how you put it together. Of course, as mentioned before, really excited to provide this under a Creative Commons license. It's universal public domain all over the world, which is, you know, a cool way to contribute back to the community and share with everybody, especially when you get to do that in your day job. So a little bit of an acknowledgement, you know, thanking the GSA, 18F, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Office of Management and Budget, and a lot of the other folks who, since 2012 or 2015, did a lot of the work for enabling federal government employees like myself to contribute to and release open source software. It is a very different world now than 10 years ago, and I think it's going to be an even more different world 10 years from today. And I'm really excited to be a part of helping to define what that looks like. And my role in doing that is to enable folks like you to participate. And, you know, this is by the people for the people type stuff. And the more participants that we have contributing, you know, the better we can represent the population of the country and the needs that we have. And the less times we need to recreate the wheel, and the more times we can capture value and not see it used for duplicate work. There's nothing I hate more than seeing the same problem get solved over and over again with a different budget. So that was the README. I just want to show you the config file really quick. So this is, we can blow that up a little bit. Let's see. Yeah. So sorry for the white space hack to like move it to the side to get around the key, but this is the title, and it's just, you know, an INI style config where you just have one option per line, and then you tell it equals and you give it the format. So the title offset, the date format, so that's how it just says like the day. It could be like the whole timestamp or whatever you want it to show. If you have a project that has like a week-long history for a hackathon, you can tweak it and run the visualization so that it goes really slow, and you can do it almost in real time and play things back. I did like a super time travel-y version because we're on like Miss Frizzle's, you know, repo dive into the history. So I try to show everything in about 5 or 7 minutes. But if we played this back in real time, that's like 6 or 7 years of development time in 6 minutes, which is really fun. And the auto skip is what helps with that. So you just say, give it like 0.05 seconds between commits. So you just like speed through all the commits as quick as you can. And I said, yep, we want to highlight the users so that they're there. Make the file idle time 0. So that's how long before the bubbles disappear. I wanted every file that's been edited to stay on the screen. But like I was saying before, when you get into hundreds or thousands of repos, sometimes it's a good idea to have them fade out so that you can just see whatever is the most recent, and then it'll go away so you can see and focus on other pieces. But, you know, this is why these configs are here. And for production, you want to hide things like file names, the root of the tree so that each one appears as its own leaf, the bloom effect, which is like this cool like glow that comes in when it makes it look pretty, but when there's so many things on the screen, it's just really distracting and like a giant shining light that you can't see through. So I had to turn it off. And then the mouse, so that, you know, it could run without seeing the mouse when we render the video. And then when I'm doing my like tweaking, you can keep the progress bar or hide the progress bar so that you don't accidentally skip ahead. In this version, I have it stopping at the end, but you can have it loop. I didn't have to use YouTube to loop through the video. I could have run it locally, but I wanted to use 2 laptops so I could have my speaker notes too. And then multi-sampling is for like anti-aliasing to make things look a little better. No maximum amount of files on the screen. No lag from the time that someone commits a file to the time that you see it show up. Sometimes there's a delay. The output frame rate, just 30 frames per second so that it looks good. I user scaled it up so you could see the little people because once you zoom out really far you can't see them too good. Full screen, OBS, and then seconds per day is like 0.15, so that's again like how we skip through. But if you want to do 1 second per day or 10 seconds per day, you can really stretch out and cut different kinds of configs that visualize different kinds of software projects. I've used this in the past to look at the history of projects that were short-lived over like a weekend, right? So you still want to see everything, but real time is going to be too slow. So if you set that seconds per day to be whatever you want and the auto skip to match it, you can really dial in the range of GORS to serve your purposes. The bloom intensity I had set even though I didn't use it. And then you can pass it a custom background image. So I named my file this long ridiculous thing, but you can just pass it a PNG, a JPEG, or whatever you want. You can set the file size of what the title and the key looks like. The camera mode has 2 different sort of options. Overview, where you look at everything on the screen, or track. So you can give it like a specific user. In the past, when we visualized the Yum project, it was back at FudCon in like, oh gosh, 2014, 2013 maybe. And the lead maintainer of that project, Seth Vidal, had recently been in a tragic accident. So we developed sort of a memorial visualization that followed Seth's path through the history of the Yum project. And we broke down each year to be a separate tree. And we had all the files that Seth touched be blue so that you could see how much of the project was touched by this one particular maintainer. And these are all just configuration options that are all available because of GORS. GORS is a really powerful tool. If you look at my YouTube, you'll see I got quite a few of these things. I really like using it for this kind of stuff. But the camera mode, overview lets you look at everything, and track lets you follow specific users like that. Padding is just like how close the tree gets to the outside. You don't want it to overlap if you can help it. The key on the side is just a true, so you can see like the key of all the file types. And then there's captions that you can add to it. This is kind of a newer feature that was added somewhat recently. So they might have been a little bit small or low on the screen for everyone to read in the back, but I tried to give some information about what you were looking at as the timestamps were coming up on the screen. And you can set the size, the duration, you can do the offset of how far it comes horizontally. And then this is commented out at the bottom, but you can actually have like avatars instead of the little bubbles of, or the little human bubble looking things there. You can like actually make those a picture of what you want. So lots of configuration options and tweaks that you can make to GORS. This is the config that I use for this visualization, but there are lots of different configs options that you can take. And then just really quick in the captions file. So this is what it looks like. These are Unix style timestamps. It was a little bit of a fun dance doing the conversion between dates and timestamps, but there's websites and tools for that. And then whatever message you want, pipe delimited. So I was able to say, okay, this is when blue button hits, and then I'd pop up a little caption that says this is when blue button was released. So this is how you put captions on the videos, and it's very straightforward. It's all plain text. So again, lots of extensible tools. This is all of the tech that went into making the presentation. This is all available on GitHub right now. It's public. It's Creative Commons public license, so take it, run with it. The GORS website itself is excellent resource where you can find all of the configuration options and all of the settings that I've talked about today. you can almost follow this word for word the same way that I did to create a visualization for your project or your community, just like the one that you saw today. So that's Gorse. It is an amazing tool. Special shout out to Andrew Caldwell and the Gorse.io project contributors. You can check out their GitHub repo here, and Gorse.io is where you can find that. So let me put the shiny thing back on again and finish off and take her home. One second while I bring my speaker notes back up. If I get my password right. Okay. So throughout this process, there were a few lessons to be learned for sure. I've been fortunate enough to serve in community management and community leadership and community advocate roles in a variety of open source organizations. And typically, there's a lot of contributors and there's a lot of repos. CMS has hundreds of repos, thousands of contributors, tens of thousands of contractors, and millions of lines of code. So that's like a couple extra zeros on the amount of data and metrics that I typically would track as someone who works within an open source program or open source program office. And the complexity is astonishing. The federal government is the largest employer in the United States, right? So the amount of organizational complexity that goes into mapping the entire ecosystem, like this is what 5 out of 200 looks like. So one of the big lessons learned immediately was that, this is scale. This is at scale, just a staggering amount of development. And, we're gonna need a lot of tools and more people to sort of figure out and keep track of all the things that are happening. And, each one of these trees that you're looking at, in and of itself, it's its own microcosm of complexity that's solving like some hard problem in tech. So, it's microscopes and telescopes. You can zoom in with a microscope as deep as you want into each repository, and you can zoom out with a telescope as broad as you want in the galaxy of open source that exists in the federal government space and beyond. There's exciting things that are happening at the international level. The World Health Organization has an OSPO now. They have a lead. The United Nations at their General Assembly is proposing that they create an open source program office. There are other parts of the government inside at the state level in the United States that are creating digital service programs like the one that I'm a part of. So, open source is becoming more and more just how we do things. And the idea that we need metrics and that we need experts and we need maintainers is becoming more and more clear as we see more threats and we see more leaks and we see more cybersecurity incidents and we see more state actors and we see more of the world being eaten by software, as they say around nearby these parts. Folks like you at this conference are some of the best people that can help to address those challenges. And if we're going to address some of the biggest and most complex problems facing healthcare, we're going to need all the help we can get. So part of my job isn't just making shiny visualizations like this. We're actually building teams. And there are 3 programs that I want to mention specifically today. One of them is a program called the Digital Core, which is CORPS, so digitalcore.gsa.gov. It is very similar to USDS.gov, which is the 4-year tour of duty model, where we bring technologists in to help modernize the government. But Digital Core is meant for early career technologists who are just leaving their undergraduate and graduate programs. And it's a 2-year tour of duty, so it's a little shorter. They give a 50% signing bonus, so that can help incentivize people to make the switch from some of the other opportunities that are out there and be a part in the public sector. And then at the end of it, there's a full-time job waiting for you. And this I thought was a good idea when I started last year, but 2022, we saw, I think, over 100,000 layoffs in the tech sector, according to layoffs.fyi. So, and the people who are affected most by that aren't necessarily the senior folks who've been around for 10 years. It's the people who are just getting out of school. And it's the people who are looking for jobs and looking for internships. So Digital Core, I believe, is a really great opportunity for people to get some early career experience doing real world problem solving. There are over 150 million people that depend on the code that CMS hosts. And that is a great way to learn some experience at scale. And at the end of your 2 years, if you don't want to stick around, that's fine. You did your public service and you can go on into the private sector with a perspective of how things work at that scale and bring those skills to the next role that you have. So Digital Core, there's a pretty short window. It's like 2 or 3 weeks that it opens up. This year, I think it was open in like late December, early January. But if that sounds like an opportunity that you or someone you know would be interested in, keep an eye on that website and follow the Twitter account. digitalcore.gsa.gov. So that's the 2-year version. The 4-year version is usds.gov. So I'm at a permanent digital service inside of CMS where we are CMS employees, but half of my team is detailed in from the Office of Management and Budget at the White House. So they get detailed into different agencies across the government to help solve gnarly problems and do novel research and bring best practices. So USDS is another place where if you're later in your career and you're established, you can do a 4-year tour of duty like I'm doing now to get involved in bringing your skills to public sector. And then earlier in the pipeline, there's a program called Coding It Forward, and codingitforward.com is the URL. Chris Kwang, who was the founder of that program, was actually tapped by the Biden administration to create the Digital Core at GSA. So the Coding It Forward program is still operating, and it does placements of 10-week paid internships for undergraduate students or boot camp students who are currently enrolled, and they get placed at federal, state, and local level governments. So you don't just have to work for the federal government if you're looking for an early career opportunity. And I just went through that interviewing process and just completed and sent offers, and we had 3 students accept. And, you know, before they start, I'm not gonna like blow up their spot or anything like that, but it's some really amazing pipeline of talent that group has built, and we're super excited for those folks to start. Upstream contributors, people who've worked in big tech companies, people who are doing major open source and open data pipelines in projects like Hadoop, Crates and Rust, Python, Java, lots of different parts of the ecosystem of open source that a lot of them are being talked about today. So the idea is that we're building a pipeline where if we have an early career pipeline that starts in the undergrad, Coding It Forward, those students can apply to become Digital Core Fellows. Those Digital Core Fellows can join the US Digital Service if they want to continue a tour of duty, or if they want to continue to be a permanent employee, there's a place for them to land at the end of it. And really, underneath all of it is the ambient open source community itself. So our GitHub repositories and the projects that are being worked on in the open can serve as like a lobby where we can start to gather the folks who are interested in this work and prove that they know how to do it, and that we know how to solve these problems and address them, and that when we're doing these hiring actions, that is a ready pool of people. And because the opportunities are limited, it's sad, you know, I wish we could take everyone who applied. Thousands of people apply to these programs and only hundreds or less can get into them right now because we're still growing and building them. This is the first year that Digital Core was started. So I want to make sure that those people who weren't able to make it this year have the opportunity to gain experience and work on contributing to real world problems and help to solve some of these challenges that we're dealing with. So this pipeline approach, I believe, has a lot of potential, and part of why I'm here is to find out how best we can engage with the open source community. What projects are available? What are the needs that need to be met? Who are the people that want to help and answer the call? So, thank you, Scale, for being here at this talk today. and I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions?
I'm involved in a group that's providing IT skills for underserved teenagers and things. We try to connect them to internships and things like that. Now, I know that being the federal government, your flexibility is not the world's greatest, but is there any way to connect to you?
Yes. Like I said, this is a pipeline, right? So if you're working with early career high school students, happy to connect you with the folks at Coding It Forward, happy to connect you with the folks at Digital Core, so that when those opportunities to apply and they're looking for their next step, we can make sure that they are informed when the window opens so that they can get a chance to apply too. So let's definitely connect after the talk. I'd love to share information. Thank you.
So my question is around security. So in a world where connected personal data is kind of becoming a modern currency, do you have published guidelines to assist vendors that are consuming this data? Or do you, if not, do you have penalties for when that data is compromised?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is there are other people who specialize in those particular areas who can give you a better answer than I can. One thing that you can look at that just came out this week was the White House's National Cybersecurity Strategy. And there's a lot of guidance in there around software supply chain assurance, software bill of materials, some of the challenges that we see in securing open source. I personally believe that no matter how perfect the tools we get, if we have a perfect list of every CVE and a perfect list of every open port and a perfect list of every out-of-date dependency, there are still not enough maintainers to solve all of those problems. And even if Google and Apple and Microsoft and every other large tech company on the planet put together a biggest pot of money that they could to just throw at this problem, it's still not going to solve it, because a lot of times the way that we are trying to dig our way out of a software hole is to dig another software hole. And we're seeing software sprawl. So we're actually creating a larger surface of projects to maintain, and that's further fragmenting and creating proliferation issues. So for me personally, when we have public infrastructure, digital public goods is a concept that is being talked a lot at the UN level and at the international level now, so that we can start to unite around common infrastructure and stop fragmenting, so that we can maintain one stack or a smaller number of stacks, so that we can start to unite these hackers and maintainers. And we need programs to train them. You know, we need to get the lottery factor up above 1. You know, thousands of single maintainer projects are crucial to the structure of our government, of our internet, and everything else. Let's get that number up to 2 to start. And these programs I just talked about hopefully can help to build that pipeline. Great question.
Hi, sir. I'm local in the Los Angeles area, and I was wondering, is there any, local groups that meet, like bi-monthly, monthly, or quarterly? Thank you.
Yeah. So I know LA and San Francisco are far away from each other. They are. But as someone who lives in upstate New York near Canada, when people say, oh, you just go to New York City all the time, I'm like, no, it's like about as far away between where I am in New York and where you are from SF. But Code for America has their headquarters, and a lot of the work that they focus on now is actually on California state level stuff. So CalFresh, food programs, and other types of opportunities to work at the state level. I believe California has a digital service as well. I know that the city of San Francisco has a digital service, but you might be surprised if you start looking around for digital service, name of locality. Talking to the Code for America folks, they might be able to help you get plugged in. And there's a nonprofit organization called the US Digital Response, where they are working with volunteers to help them get placed into these places where there may not be budgets at the local or county level, and there are technologists who want to get involved, and then those can lead to contracts and jobs, et cetera. But there are a lot of civic hacking orgs out there that have come and gone, but Code for America is still here. Code for America Summit is coming up in May. So that's in DC this year, I believe, but I believe they're also going to like stream some of those talks, and they have a ton of mailing lists and resources. There used to be things called brigades, which were like local groups, user groups, where people could hang out and talk to each other like you're talking. So, you know, I'm not from this side of the country, but even I know of California being a hotbed for civic hacking. So, you know, Google around, and if you find those resources, share them, because we need more people like you. Thank you. Any other questions? I'm probably getting close to the end here.
I think let's make this the last question, and then if you have other questions, you can talk after the talk.
You mentioned a number of other groups that you work that are going into, or governmental groups that are going into this open source mentality. How do you share between them? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with just publishing where we can. I am tracking, along with the Chaos Project, CHAOSS.community. They have a project called Augur, which is scraping GitHub repos, and it's a tool for getting metrics. And you know, I use that to track the CMS repos, but I'm also tracking any other .gov agency that's repos that I've started to use. And you know, those tools are powerful at what they do, but the community around it is still just nascent and emerging. So GitHub used to have like a government community that was led by Ben Balter and some other folks. That's still a place where you can go to like see across a lot of these organizations. The Software Heritage Foundation is more of a EU-based organization, but they are providing like one place where all the source code is treated as a cultural heritage, just the same way that landmarks and museums and, you know, historical sites are treated as cultural heritage sites at the UN level, UNICEF. So source code is just starting to become recognized as like part of our humanities cultural heritage. So check out Software Heritage, check out the UN and UNICEF programs, the digital public goods programs. I'm happy to try and brainstorm a few others, but there's awesome lists all over if we look for them. But we do need to bring as many people together as we can.
Once again, Remy DeCausemaker, thank you very much.